So Mary-Louise, this new study, what strikes you about it, and is it big enough to be a breakthrough?
Mhm. Good morning. Look, it is an interesting breakthrough. So there were two different groups that within this study that looked at about 80,000, nearly 81,000 children under the age of 18, and another group of over 400,000 under 18. And they both identified that children under the age of 18, and it was from about March 2020 to June last year. So many different strains in one group, and then in the other group just prior to Delta. So I think that this suggests that maybe non-Delta and maybe some Delta might infect children, and that their rates of diabetes 1 and 2 is quite high. You know, one of them found 0.08%, and that they were about twice as likely to have diabetes than kids who didn't have COVID but had a respiratory infection. And then the other group had 0.25%. Now that's quite high, really. So that's, you know, about a third higher than any other kid that had a respiratory infection. So I think we'll learn a lot, but it will be interesting to know if children under 18 who get Omicron may also have a risk of diabetes. And don't forget, each one of these groups of children under the age of 18, a very, very small proportion, you know, less than 1% of those children were hospitalized. So they're not really severe infections, and yet they look as if they still can cause, you know, type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And it will be very interesting to know if this will continue for quite some time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And while we're talking about this subject, you can't help but think about how we know that obesity can lead to diabetes. We also know that it became pretty clear, even early on in the pandemic, that obesity seemed to be linked to more severe cases of coronavirus and even death. Is there some same mechanism going on here that makes all of this linked, or is that something completely different?
Look, it could be based on issues of weight, and but it might not. And so this is where we really need the rest of the world to listen to this and support this. Now, one of the problems with children under the age of 18 who don't go to hospital, they often don't get looked after at a very close level by their general practitioner. And I think this study really shows that their physician, their general practitioner, need to check them when they're having COVID and afterwards to see, one, are they overweight? If they are or if they aren't, are they having a type 1 or type 2 diabetes as well? Because this could have been related to, being overweight with children in the US. But not every country has this issue. And I know in my country with indigenous populations, they're not overweight, but they may be at risk of diabetes as well. And that could be the case also in some indigenous groups around the world. So I think it really does tell physicians, keep a watch on children under the age of 18 for whether or not they've got diabetes and whether or not this goes on or does it improve.
Yeah, it seems like the coronavirus, there's so many different things in the body that it can affect that nobody realized early on, and all of these strange effects people are feeling. But when you look at the pandemic, where we stand now, we've seen these predictions that the Omicron variant and the spikes that it caused are supposed to peak by the end of this month. But at the same time, we're seeing record numbers of infections in many countries. It just seems like we're never done with this. So where do we stand now on this maybe coming to an end?
Mm. Well, a lot of people hope that Omicron will get us to the end and that maybe, this will be the end of the pandemic. However, many of us don't agree with that, sadly, that we think that given that there are about 100 countries that haven't reached their vaccination uptake at about 40% of their population, that people are alive and sadly will be potentially, a living test tube for COVID, and that Omicron may just be one of these mutations that may change. So it could be worse. It could get worse. This Omicron appears as if it doesn't cause a lot of severe infections. At the World Health Organization in a couple of days, I'll be at a meeting where we'll be explained to us by globally by experts whether or not Omicron is as mild as we were hoping, and whether or not this is true, or whether or not the increase in hospitalization is mathematical. So when numbers grow, is it just that you're going to get more people who are older having to go to hospital? Are you going to get more children that potentially might get diabetes 1 or 2? Or is it very mild? So in a couple of days, I'll be able to answer what we've been told. But I'm very concerned that this is not going to sadly be the only variant of concern. And I'm hoping that the pharmaceutical companies that have made and done a great job making vaccines from, during 2020, they worked together and they identified a vaccine for the, December 2020, whether or not they can develop one that is not around the spike that then, of course, causes mutations, and new variants don't work with the vaccine. Because in December at WHO, many virologists explained to us around the world that the variant, the vaccine, efficacy was not good with this Omicron, and of course wasn't good with Delta either. And while you didn't die, of course you still got sick. So let's hope they develop a better vaccine.
Got it. Well, there's still so many unanswered questions, but that is a lot of great knowledge that you just bestowed upon us. And for that, we thank you, Mary-Louise McLaws.